Out of every video game franchise we come to enjoy throughout the years, Final Fantasy and Devil May Cry are easily some of the best and most popular ones out there, especially for having a unique and interesting cast of characters that really is hard not to recognize some of them, at least the main ones. And in this upcoming Death Battle episode, Dante from the DMC verse and Clive Rossfield from Final Fantasy XVI are going to be pitted against each other. Though I will admit, when this fight was first revealed, I generally thought it was going to be another Sephiroth vs Virgil situation, given the sheer amount of complex lore and hexes that the Final Fantasy verse has. However, after looking back and digging down the lore of the Devil May Cry verse, it turns out that said verse is just as complex, which then got me realizing that the outcome might actually be the other way around. In fact, after digging a bit further, I went from thinking that Dante has a chance of winning, to Clive getting cooked in his upcoming fight. Of course, the amount of hexes in DMC still doesn't compare to the amount in Final Fantasy, but considering how both fighters don't really have that many hexes to use in battle in the first place, especially Dante, who frankly doesn't require them, the outcome remains the same. Still, just how greatly outmatched is Clive when going up against Dante? Well, with nothing more to say, welcome to Animanco 9000, a channel where we talk about content related to anime, manga, and artistic media. In this video, I'll be going over why Dante vs Clive might not actually be close. Also please, if you want to hear more of the contents I mentioned earlier, just subscribe and hit the notification bell. Starting with the usual category, let's first look over each of the characters' strength and attack power. Now many of you might disagree for what I'm about to say here, but in terms of strength, I do at least think that both Dante and Clive are roughly equal. However, at the same time, the level of said strength is really dependent on what form they take. In the case of Clive, if he were to fight Dante in his regular base form, he would be no match against the Devil Hunter. Although not completely, as the former had beaten high-level monsters without the need of special powers before, and went against those who have the ability to semi-prime, or partially transform into the icon they are bonded with. For more context, the icons are basically godlike giant monsters who represent each of the elements they control, and when the user, or dominant they are called, semi-prime, they are able to use a fair portion of the icon's abilities, giving them great power. So, including the few times that Clive has managed to hold his own against those who have primed, he should briefly do the same against Dante. Nevertheless, in both situations, base form Clive has shown to struggle against his opponents, unlike Dante, who at one point effortlessly stopped a punch from the Savior, a godlike statue who is powered by demonic energy. Because of this feat, dealing with Clive, even if he were to semi-prime, would be no different than how Dante dealt with Nero in DMC4. As such, in order for Clive to remotely stand a chance against Dante, he would need to transform into Ifrit, since the icon was powerful enough to physically outmatch the icon of Earth Titan, and one of his incarnation could punch a magical beast that was the size of a mountain. Not only that, during the second half of Titan's boss fight, the icon did turn into a literal living mountain after absorbing the Mother Crystal, further increasing both its strength and size. Yet Clive in his Ifrit form was still able to overpower and beat the insanely large boss monster, despite the huge size difference. What's more, later in the story, while as Ifrit, Clive was also able to match up against the Icon of Darkness Odin, who at one point split the sea in half. Like, it's really crazy to think about. Of course, when going up against Dante in his Sin Devil Trigger form, yeah, that's where Clive is going to have a tough time again, and even though the full extent of this version of Devil Trigger is pretty unknown, it nonetheless gave the Devil Hunter a massive power boost. In fact, it was so massive that the son of Sparta was able to surpass his own father and defeat the powerful Demon King Urizen. Also, FYI, before eating the fruit of the Clive to become a god, Urizen was already stronger than Mundus and Argosax, and they were both gods, as well as being stronger than the first demon god, who was able to split a universe in two. Then, upon fusing with V and turning back into Virgil, Dante's power-hungry brother had become so strong, well, let's just say the outcome of his fight against Sephiroth would have ended differently. Not to mention, he'd be the only character who Dante would need to fight seriously, even though his own powers have grown a lot. I won't deny that does sound like a huge power gap between the two, but then again, if Clive were to become the Mythos, which is a fancy way of saying that his body would contain all the magical abilities of a god, then he could still be equal to Dante, especially since he used that very power to kill Ultima, who is basically another low multiverse level god of the Final Fantasy verse. But as for every other physical stats, yeah, Clive ain't gonna get any more of that W from here on, such as the case for speed, which I initially thought the two were about the same, as they both could keep up against those who can react and attack at light speed or higher. However, upon finding out that Dante was able to keep up against Argosax, who moved so fast he could transcend time and space, it's practically saying how he's faster than Clive, who is able to keep up and invade the Icon of Light Bahamut. Adding Trickster to the mix, landing a hit on the Devil Hunter won't be easy. Plus, even if Clive did manage to hit Dante, the latter's durability could shrug off the former's attack like it's nothing, especially since it's that very same durability that could allow Dante to survive against the harshest attacks from high-level demons. What's more, if the Devil Hunter did somehow get hurt, well, thanks to his demonic heritage, he could easily heal from wounds that would be considered fatal by most. Now, that's not to say that Clive's durability is any less than Dante's, as he did withstand a massive storm created by the Icon of Wind Garuda, and survive against one of Odin's abilities to cut space, albeit barely. However, unless Clive has a healing factor that is fast and broken like Dante's, he can only endure so much during a fight. There's also the issue of stamina, and unlike Dante who can go on fighting without a moment of rest, Clive will easily get exhausted after using so much of his power, and after a lengthy fight. So for that, Dante takes stamina by a mile away. The next category I'll be moving on to is versatility, and almost similar to what I had with speed, I initially thought that Clive had the advantage here, due to the magical abilities he took from each icon, and could use to assist him in battle. First ones are Garuda and Titan, which Clive can use to increase his melee attacks as well as defense. The other is Shiva, allowing him to unleash powerful ice attacks and freeze his opponents in their place. Through Rama, he can shoot lightning that is powerful enough to temporarily incapacitate Typhon, as well as use quick teleportation. Then there's Bahamut, granting Clive the ability to shoot out powerful energy beams. Let's not forget about Odin, along with its ability to erase space and slow down time. And finally, after absorbing the powers of the Phoenix from his brother Joshua, Clive could shoot out a volley of fireballs and have some healing ability, so it could help him last a bit longer in a fight. Combining all of this with Ifrit's already immense power, Clive could run circles around Dante. However, as it so happened, Dante's large arsenal of weapons could easily counter or cancel out Clive's abilities. Though it is unknown at just how many of the weapons that the Devil Hunter still has in store, I feel that these are enough to make all of Clive's abilities useless. Obviously, there's his primary and standard weapons, the Sword of Dante, as well as Ebony and Ivory for close and long range attacks respectively. Of course, if he wants to switch up his melee, Dante could use either Cavallari or Balrog to further increase his strikes. Same thing with King Cerberus, except as an extra bonus, Dante can change the weapon into 3 forms and control 3 of the natural elements. Navain is also helpful, and being a weapon that's charged by heaven, the Devil Hunter can use it to match up against Rama's lightning attacks. Pandora would definitely be needed as well, if only to match up against Clive's more destructive abilities. Next are Lucifer and Dr. Faust, which can allow Dante to summon a barrage of energy swords and gigantic red orb meteors. Lastly, using Quicksilver, Dante would have no trouble dealing with Odin's ability to slow down time, since it could do the same. There's also a set of other long-range weapons that Dante could use on hand, but the most powerful ones are likely the double Kalina N. Still, assuming that Clive can somehow overpower some of these weapons, there is one ability that Dante can use to even the playing field, and that's Royal Guard, which as you all know is a style that can block and parry almost any attack. With all of this and maybe more, Dante is not letting his opponent get the upper hand. Regardless, combat experience is what really counts in his fight, and as most of you can already guess, Dante got plenty of it. Granted, both combatants have been fighting since they were young, and have eventually grown to the point they can defeat godlike beings, but for Dante's case, taking on those who are similar to Ultima is just a typical Tuesday for the Devil Hunter. Plus, despite Clive's own advanced combat skills, he did have trouble facing against enemies like Sleipnir during a duel. I mean, he was a human magical construct made through Odin's powers, so we could assume that Sleipnir is stronger than normal humans. But compared to how Dante rarely takes his fights seriously, and still manages to overpower most of the DMC verse strongest demons on a daily basis, Clive would have to use everything he got to at least make the Devil Hunter see him more than just a warm-up. Nevertheless, I can probably see the two briefly matching in swordplay in the beginning of the fight, but as the fighting drags on, Clive would likely lose ground. Moreover, whatever Clive has is nothing new that Dante hasn't seen or can't handle. Big example is how one of Odin's abilities is similar to Virgil's. So, going by this estimate, I can see why Dante is winning this fight. Even the Final Fantasy fans know it. That being said, I wouldn't be too surprised if Clive did end up being the winner, but we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, that's basically for what I have to say about this fight. Now let's see if it can also live up to the hype in Death Battle. Also, if you guys have anything else to add regarding the two combatants in this fight, just leave a comment down below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.